Hello everyone, my name is Dalton and welcome to my channel. Today is like the most anticipated video of the year. It is the culmination of the year. It is the best books that I've read in 2021. I don't know about anybody else, but this has been a pretty mediocre reading year. I think other than rereads, I've had 2 5-star books on this. Like 2. I read 50 books, and I only have 2 5 stars. Technically I have 4, but I reread 2 of them, so I'm not technically counting them. But yeah, I don't know. There was just a lot of meh books that I read. There weren't a whole lot that I disliked, even though that video is coming after this one. But there's just, some of them were okay. A lot of books that I read were just okay. I don't know why. I don't know if I was just picking the wrong books to read or what was going on this year, but needless to say, it was kind of disappointing this year. But yeah, besides that, this video is just going to be me talking about the best books that I read, and I also have some honorable mentions here. They're kind of like books that took me by surprise. So I did end up really enjoying them, so I was really surprised by the outcome of them. But without further ado, let's get into the best books that I read this year. Honestly, I'm just gonna share these as I read them. So like, I'm gonna start with the first book that I read, the first best book that I read, and then go to the next one, and then the next one throughout the year. They're not ranked or anything. I'll tell you my ratings, but that's how I'm gonna do this. So the first book that I read and enjoyed in 2021 was The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a huge standalone fantasy novel, and this book is so good for so many different reasons. And every time I think about this book, I get a little annoyed. So it's very character driven. However, one of my main issues with this book was that it follows like 4 perspectives. However, it focuses on like one main perspective. And it's not that I didn't like her perspective, it's just that I wish more time was given to the other perspectives, just so they were more fleshed out than just the one was. But the world building in this book, I mean, it's big, but it's so immaculate. I mean, Samantha Shannon packs so much intrigue, so many different worlds. Like, honestly, the different cultures that she shoves into this book are so interesting and so unique. And this book was so good. I will say one of my other issues with it is the ending. It takes a long time to get there, and I'll be honest, the payoff is not worth the 800 pages that you read before it. I wish you would have taken like another 100 pages and fleshed out the ending a little bit more. But besides that, I did thoroughly enjoy this book. Like I said, it was the first book that I enjoyed in 2021. I believe I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Directly following Priory of the Orange Tree, I reread Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I did give this book 5 stars. However, it was a reread because I was trying to reread the series so I can read the newest book, Rhythm of War, because I still haven't read that. So I reread this. If you don't know, it's the second book in the huge Stormlight archive that Brandon Sanderson is currently working on. It basically follows Shallan, and this book is excellent. I will say, I like Shallan as a character, but for whatever reason, reading her like flashback chapters, I found them so boring, and I do really connect with her as a character during this book, and I really enjoy her perspective in this book, but for whatever reason, I find her flashbacks in this so boring, even though it's probably my favorite book in the Stormlight archive so far that I've read. But like I said, I did give it 5 stars, but it was a reread, and I gave it 5 stars the first time, so I'm not technically counting this as one of my 5-star books this year. The next book that I actually gave 5 stars, and it is probably my second favorite book that I read this year, is The City That We Became by N.K. Jemisin. This book is excellent. So basically, it's following a couple different people as New York City is being birthed. I don't know how else to describe it. So basically, in this world that Jemison created, it's an urban fantasy setting where these huge famous cities actually have souls and are born, and that sort of thing. So basically, the different boroughs of New York, so like Manhattan, Brooklyn, Harlem, they all have different humans that are their souls. And basically, there's just this alien demon thing that's trying to kill New York as it's being birthed to destroy the city. And these different souls of New York, the different boroughs, go through and try to stop this being. And there's some issues with Staten Island. It was so interesting. And Jemison's writing in this is probably the best that I've read of hers. And I've read multiple books by her now. But it was just so fabulous. It was so cool. I've been to New York a couple times, so like the amount of the level of depth and just the different descriptions of the city and the different souls and the different boroughs was so interesting to actually see and read. I love this book so much. Like I said, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it's like my second favorite book that I read this year. The next book that I want to talk about is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is the best book that I read this year. I've mentioned this in another video, or a couple other videos maybe now. This is the best book I've read this year. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars without hesitation. I flew through this book. I was pissed when I couldn't be reading this book at work and that sort of stuff, but if you don't know, this is a literary fiction novel that follows Vanessa. It basically follows her through 2 different timelines, one in like 2007 or 2009, something like that, and then 10 years later as she's an adult in 2017, following her during like the Me Too movement when victims are coming forward saying that they've been raped and sexually assaulted. So we see Vanessa basically conflicted with her childhood memories of being groomed and raped by one of her professors. And we see it happening as it's happening when she's a child, and then we see her dealing with the trauma and everything as an adult, and as she tries to wrap her head around her feelings and her emotions toward this professor. Was she actually raped? Was there actually love there? She was a child, he was not. So like it brings up so many great questions and morality issues and that sort of thing. And Russell does it in such an excellent way. The writing in this book is so fantastic. Like I said, it's the best book I read this year, and it is that because of like everything that's in this book. And I've seen a lot of talk about how a lot of people feel that this book becomes repetitive towards the end of it when we watch Vanessa basically try to seduce a professor while she's in college. And the only thing I have to say about that is I don't think it's repetitive. I think Russell is intentionally doing that with Vanessa as she's an adult to try to have Vanessa wrap her head around what happened to her as a child, try to look at what happened to her as a child through the lens of adulthood, even though, you know, you can argue that she wasn't an adult in college, whatever. But she's just trying to wrap her head around the trauma that she went through. This book is so fabulous. Please read it. The next best book that I read this year was A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. I had to read this book when I was in college, or I was supposed to have read this book when I was in college. I was taking a global Anglophone literature class, and this 1,500-page monstrosity was one of the books that we were supposed to read for that class, and there were like 12 other books, mind you. So I started it and got like 300 pages in, I want to say, when I first started it in college, and I absolutely loved it. However, because we were reading so much, I literally just didn't have time to finish it. So I picked it up over the summer because I knew I'd have some more time to really delve into it and read it. And damn, was it good. This has some of the best characters that I've ever read. Ever. Obviously, it's a 1,500-page book, so you spend a lot of time with them, and you see them do a lot of different things. But, oh my god, did I fall in love with them. So, essentially, at the heart of this story is a love story. We follow Lata and her mom as she looks for a suitable boy to marry in the 1960s in India, in post-colonial India. And basically we see her fall in love with somebody who she can't marry, and then her mom is trying to set up certain relationships for her because her mom wants her to have a suitable boy to marry, and to carry on her family name and that sort of stuff. So at its heart, that's basically what this novel is about, but it's so much more than that. I think we follow three whole families and we see each different person in those families really go on their own journey, and that sort of stuff. And there's also so much politics in this book because some of the characters are in politics. But Vikram Seth really is just trying to write a love letter, to India, and he's literally just trying to get everything that is India into a book, and I think he does it so fantastically. And while I do have some issues with this book, I did only give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Um, some of the chapters that do focus on politics are so unbearably slow. I think this book took me like a month, maybe a month and a half to read it. And even then, I still read a couple books throughout it because I just had to give it time to sit. Um, there are some very boring political chapters, and I understand why he's putting those in there because he is trying to paint a full picture of India and what's going on politically inside the country after the British left. But still, at the end of the day, I loved the other characters so much besides like the political chapters that I really didn't even care. I can't say that I'll ever reread this book, and I know a lot of people probably will never read it because of its size alone, but it really was so fantastic. The writing is fantastic. I'm so glad I actually got to read and finish this. And it's probably my most proudest book that I've ever finished because it's huge. So, yeah. The next book that I'm going to talk about actually took me way by surprise, and that is The Stand by Stephen King. I have read 4 or 5 novels now by Stephen King, including It and Misery, Carrie, and while I liked Carrie, I didn't love it. The other 2 I really didn't like, so this really took me by surprise because I was not expecting to like it. But I fell in love with the characters. I think this is Stephen King's like best character work in any of the novels that I've read, at least. So basically, you're following the remnant of humanity after a virus basically kills off like 99% of the population. Well, I think it's called a super virus. Kills off 99% of the population. So you're just following these characters who are basically stranded by themselves without anything anymore. I mean, electricity stops working, water, heat, that sort of stuff. So they really have to learn how to survive, all over again without like normal things that people are so used to. They have to scour for food and that sort of stuff. I will say towards the end, Stephen King is not great with endings, but I didn't mind it so much. I thought it was better than some of his other endings that I've read. Like I said, though, this book really took me by surprise. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I was really not expecting to like this, but yeah. Then the next book that I read that I gave a 5 out of 5 stars is Beloved. This, again, is a reread, so I'm not technically counting it towards like how many 5-star books that I read this year, because I already knew I was going to love it. I actually wrote my whole like senior English thesis on this novel. I love this book so much, and I listened to the audiobook this reread, and hearing Morrison actually like read the book to me just added a whole nother level of love for this book. If you don't know, you're basically following the Margaret Gardner tale, fictionalized obviously, but Margaret Gardner was an escaped slave who ended up murdering her children instead of having to give them back into slavery's palms. And it basically just follows Sethi as she deals with the trauma of living with having killed one of her children. And that child actually comes back to haunt her. The trauma haunts her. It's such a tragic book, but it's written so beautifully. Morrison is one of the best writers I've ever read. There's something on every single page that you can underline, honestly. I bought this book off Thrift Books and somebody literally did just that. Like, there's literally something underlined. But regardless, this is such a great book. And I am so glad I got to listen to the audiobook finally. And it was just so, I had so much fun, as terrible as that sounds, because it is such a traumatic book. You shouldn't have fun with this, but I had so much fun rereading this. I love it so much. And then the last book that really took me by surprise and I ended up really loving it is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. I've mentioned this book a couple times now. This is one of the interesting like fantasy books that I've read in quite a while, honestly. So basically it's following this culture or this country that is been at war with another country for like 200 years. And while that isn't a super interesting premise as far as fantasy comes, the way that Winters actually does it in this novel I find incredibly interesting. So just like the class system and the way that the culture and society is set up that Winters has created in this was so interesting. The different ruling class versus like the peasants and that sort of stuff, and the different class levels were just so interesting to me. Plus the different magic systems. Basically there's like this whole underworld that's super cool that you actually get to see a little bit of, and the different magic that you can pull from that underworld. Everything about this book was just so interesting. And I'll be honest, it really surprised me because I started it, got like 100 or 200 pages in, and actually just really didn't like it. I will say it is a revenge story, which is not my favorite. I don't love revenge stories by any means. I don't think anybody normally does. They can be done well, but rarely, if ever, are they. But it starts as a revenge story, and I really did not like our main character because he's kind of impulsive and makes very stupid decisions. But you see him throughout the novel grow as he's trying to become like the greatest warrior of his generation, and how he tries to do that. And everything is just so interesting. Like I said, it's one of the most unique fantasy novels that I've probably ever read, and it really did take me by surprise. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and then I ran to the bookstore to buy the next book in this series after that. Then now just some honorable mentions, books that really took me by surprise and I ended up loving more than I thought I would. The first being Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This book is huge as well, and I don't know why I picked this up, honestly. I think I just love the cover, so I seen it at a bookstore one day and I bought it. But this is basically like a cozy, like parlor type political driven story. There is very loose magic in it, because it's following magicians and like that sort of stuff. But like honestly, I couldn't even like try to describe the plot to this because it's so character focused that like the plot is kind of like left not on the back burner but like on a stove at somebody else's house like a mile away. Like it's just crazy. But I just really liked the characters. I again listened to this on audiobook while I was reading it, and I just was really surprised by liking it. The writing is so atmospheric and beautiful. There's footnotes in it. Let me try to find some. There's like footnotes in it, so like it explains the different historical magical things that are talked about in the book and that sort of stuff. So just like the world building itself and the way that this book was written was so interesting that I couldn't not love it. But yeah, I really want to read more by Susanna Clarke. I know she has Piranesi, I believe is how it's pronounced, and I want to get to that in 2022. But yeah, this book really took me by surprise. The next book that took me by surprise is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ning. I had never read anything by this author, and I honestly was just kind of in a reading slump and wanted something short and quick that I could kind of get to. And this book was only like 250 pages or something like that. And basically, at its base level, it follows a family dealing with the tragedy of their daughter missing and then dying, basically, after they find her dead body. And it follows all of the family's perspectives as they kind of go through daily life and the trauma that follows after finding a missing, dead loved one. And just like the way it was written, the characters were so bad but good at the same time. Like, they're all going through so much and all dealing with it in different ways. And like the father specifically just does terrible things, but like you can't help but feel sorry for him anyways because of what's going on in his life. And same with the mother, like she's just terrible, but like at the same time, like you can't help but feel bad for her. And honestly, the writing was beautiful. Just the way the story was told, it was like, it was such good literary fiction because of the way the story was told. I really did enjoy it. I wish there was a little bit more. Honestly, I wish it would have been a little bit longer so we could have delved in a little bit deeper, but that's besides the point. I gave that book 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. And I'm just so glad I read it, honestly. It really did pull me out of a reading slump too, so shout out to that. The next book that really surprised me was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I have read almost all of her adult work. I think the only one that I haven't read is like The Gathering of Witches or something. I don't know what it's called, but I know that there's only like one other adult novel by V.E. Schwab that I haven't read. So going into this, I tend to like her work. However, it's never anything super fantastic. Normally the writing's pretty meh. It's good, but it's not great. And then the stories are always good, but like they leave something out somewhere. So I was really shocked to start this and find the writing to be absolutely stunning. This is V.E. Schwab's best writing, in my opinion. Um, Again, this story is good. So basically, it follows Addie LaRue after she makes a deal with the devil that renders her invisible to everybody. So, like, you can meet Addie, but as soon as you walk through a door and the door closes or you fall asleep, you'll never remember meeting her. So, it follows her struggles as she's trying to deal with her invisibility and her life now that she has nobody but herself. And I really did enjoy it. However, there was another perspective that you follow, and I wasn't a huge fan of their perspective. It was okay, but I honestly wish we could have just spent the time with Addie because I did like her character that much. But like I said, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Best writing by V.E. Schwab that I've read. Really thoroughly enjoyed this novel. Alright, everyone. Those are the best books or the most surprising books that I've read this year. I hope you enjoyed some of these books. If you didn't, let me know why in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace out. Bye.